want to be the best possible leader you can be? Do you want to be the leader your team truly deserves? Then you are in the right place. In this podcast, we share deeply personal stories of how successful leaders are powered by their purpose and anchored in their authenticity, how they connect who they are to how they lead and translate their purpose into everyday actions in good times and bad, at crossroads and crises, how they challenge status quo and existing paradigms and do different things differently. Mindful leadership is the greatest unlock for the future of work. Join us in reimagining the leadership of the future with me, your host, Shahana Banerjee, CEO of Just Human, on a mission to humanize the future of work. In this episode, we dive into a mega dose of inspiration with Sarena Lin, former Chief Transformation and Talent Officer at Bayer and board member at Siemens Healthineers. She strives to make things better constantly, and it has fueled her storied career, weaving through 5 companies, 5 industries, 7 cities, 3 continents, and multiple functions. Hi, Serena. Welcome. I'm beyond thrilled to have you on our podcast.
I'm glad to be here, Shahana. Really looking forward to our conversation here.
You're so inspiring, and your journey has been so inspiring as well. I'm really excited for our listeners to get to know you today. So let's dive right in. Tell us, your story, the influences, experiences, and people who have shaped you into who you are today.
No, happy to do that. I grew up in Taiwan. I'm the oldest of 4, but really the family goes beyond that. Both my parents came from very large families from rural parts of Taiwan. My dad is one of 8. My mom is one of 11. And
Wow.
both of them were the first and only child to have gone to college. None of my grandparents have actually gone to school. I moved to Hawaii when I was 13, while my dad continued to stay in Taiwan to work. So I think that's the other aspect of it, right? It's this idea of sacrifice, the idea of continue to make things better for people you care about. So for me, what always shaped me is that, right? It's a sense of, getting that work ethic from my parents, getting the sense of values of doing something for the greater good of people around you, and continue to push yourself, right? Knowing that you could change sort of your life circumstances as you see it, witness it from your parents.
Right.
It's really interesting because my dad will always tell the story. He was always very proud. He said, I treat my girls just like I treat my sons. And, sometimes this is very Asian in a way, right? I think growing up in Asia, it is absolutely accepted for sons to get preferential treatment than daughters. So my dad was always very proud that he treated boys and the girls the same way. It's very much about working hard. As parents, will give you everything you need, but it's really up to you what you do with it. And I think that sense was instilled quite early on in my life.
Moving to Hawaii when you're 13 can't have been easy, especially when your father was still in Taiwan.
Yeah.
And you went on to clearly, blossom with going to Harvard and Yale, and then, of course, joining McKinsey. So talk a little bit about what that journey was like for you.
When I moved to Hawaii, I didn't speak any English.
Wow.
So I was 14 years old. And then, so by the time I was 14 and started high school, I figured out that if I need to get out of the island, there's a couple of things I need to do. I need to get straight A's. I need to have extracurricular activity. I need to, continue to demonstrate and shine and my ability to lead. And mind you, that my English was still very poor after a year. So it was a lot of really being quite resourceful of trying to figure out how to put my own program together. And along the way, I think, clearly I got people who helped and shaped me, right? So besides my parents, I had, wonderful teachers in the high school I was in. I mean, I remember my math teacher who basically pulled me aside and said, hey, you're going to be the math team captain, despite the fact that my English was still really bad at the time.
Wow.
But that gave me the opportunity to say, okay, how do I actually lead the team, right? And what does it mean to take this team to competitions? And so I had a number of teachers like that in high school who just really believed in me and gave me the advice along the way that sort of helped pave the way for the rest of my life.
How wonderful. Oh, you have such a storied career, 5 companies, 5 industries. 7 cities you've lived in already, multiple functions, and across 3 continents. So
Yeah,
tell us a little bit about what that journey was like for you.
yeah,
And it seems like you were constantly prompted to, take chances, to get out of your comfort zone, to seek diverse experiences. So
yeah,
why was it important for you to really
yeah,
seek out those diverse experiences? And if you can share a story about a
yeah.
transition, that was fun, we'd love that too.
The truth is, I never planned my career. I guess looking back, I always sort of guided my career with a few very simple questions. So in the beginning, am I having fun and am I still learning? And so to me, those are the two things that really drive me. Am I having fun and am I still learning? And then over time, I sort of added a third question, which is, can I have impact, right? Am I having impact in the organization that I'm in? And it's always sort of these three questions that I ask myself, every 2, 3 years or so. And if at any point in time, any of those questions and the answer is just no, then it's probably time to move on. My transition has always been somewhat interesting. I started my career at Procter & Gamble as a salesperson. This is when P&G at the time was trying to build up a sales program by attracting Ivy League graduates. Right? So there's a cohort of us that came in, and none of us actually had really deep sales experience. It was all about how do you sort of put the Ivy League title aside and say, hey, this is an amazing organization. Let's learn about what this company has to offer, right? So I learned so much about what does it mean to be customer centric. I literally have the managers that would, take me to these calls and will always park his car at the furthest lot in the parking lot because he
Hmm.
said, we're not the paying customers, right? Let the paying customers park closer to the store entrance. And you have the manager that will demonstrate for me how well and how deeply they know every store manager. They will go in and they will inquire about their kids, their family. It's that kind of customer centricity, that P&G really taught me, right? That was the start of how do I think about career, what does it mean to work in a corporate world. But the truth is, when I joined McKinsey, I actually really thought I was going to leave after 2 years once I sort of figure out what I'm going to do when I grow up. So the McKinsey career has really probably paved the way to really thinking about what does it mean to be outside of comfort zone. McKinsey basically teaches you that you will be moving from project to project, you'll be moving from company to company and industry to industry. Comfort zone in some ways is defined as, at least in my mind, that over time that you have the confidence that you'll figure things out, even if you move to a different industry or different function. And over time you can rely on the people around you, right, to help figure things out. The comfort is in believing yourself that, yeah, I can do this, right? So I guess that paved the way to my future, to my careers that follow, right? Even when I moved to different companies, to different geographies, to different functions, I never
Right.
felt uncomfortable because I know that I will be able to figure it out. I never feel the anxiety per se. In fact, I feel the sense of excitement. Remember, I said it's always about, am I having fun? Am I learning? That's what sort of drives me. So that gives me an excitement whenever I move to a new situation because I say, oh, wow, this is great. I'm going to roll up my sleeves. I'm going to learn something new.
You certainly sort of had that in spades when you moved from your role in transformation to a role in HR and transformation at Bayer. So, talk a little bit about what that journey was like for you.
No, I don't have an HR background, but I obviously have done strategy and I've done transformation. I have led P&L for many years. So when the position was first offered to me, I was actually surprised by it. I say, who am I to lead an HR function without the HR experience? So why me? But then I thought about it and then really applying a lot of my personal learning and experience and thought, actually this could be a really interesting opportunity because at the end of the day, what is transformation, right? Transformation, it is above and beyond, figuring out, where to play, how to win, the typical strategy stuff.
Right.
Transformation at the end of the day, for especially a large established company, is all about transformation of people, changing people's mindset, changing
Right.
people's behavior, and making sure that people have the inspiration to continue to give their best. So to me, the shift is actually a fairly natural one, which actually gives me the platform that says, hey, by the way, I led the strategy function at Bayer as well. So I had both strategy and HR,
Right.
right? So in some ways, that gave a very good combination where because the strategy is always quite established in terms of where the company needs to go. But the opportunity is, okay, using a very strategic lens to look at HR function and say, okay, so how do we think about talent development process? How do we think about performance management process? How do we think about recruiting differently that actually meet our transformation agenda? At Bayer, the experience is all about how do we really empower the leaders, the managers to be better. Personally, I said I have newfound respect, right, for HR as a function and for HR leaders because I can see how critical, right, how critical HR can be and will continue to be in the future.
Yeah. You came into the role during the pandemic. So that
I
is
did.
like, changed, to the power of 10, I suppose,
I,
because it's the pandemic, you're in a new function that you've not been exposed to
yeah,
previously, and you have this massive agenda. So
yeah,
talk a little bit about what some of your learnings were, but
yeah.
also an interesting story of how you may have gone about it.
When I started the position with Bayer, I was still sitting in Indianapolis. I was in
Oh,
my home office, right? Bayer headquarters in Germany. I have visited the office once, okay? And here I am, the chief transformation officer for a company of 100,000 people. And I was sitting in my home office in Indianapolis, have
wow.
not visited a single employee, have not visited a single site, have not visited a single customer. So I was trying to figure out what does it actually transformation actually mean, right? But I would say the silver lining of the pandemic is it actually allowed me to have this almost like distance-free interaction with lots of employees. So what I did during the first 3 months, actually more like 6 months or so, is basically nonstop virtual focus groups. A Zoom call or a team call, ideally you got 12 little squares in front of you, but you have this intimate interaction that you could have with employees from around the world. So that's what I did. But the most interesting thing is that, you sit there and you have these, 12 employees sitting in front of you, and many of them, and the questions are very simple. The question is, tell me, why are you here? Tell me what you appreciate the most about this company, and tell me what this company need to change, right?
Yeah.
But the best stories are actually the stories that employees tell me that say, wow, Serena, you know what we appreciate the most is just the fact that you showed up and asked us for opinion.
Right, right.
Right. And the fact that you're doing during COVID, meaning that people are sitting in their homes, right? So the distance between sort of professional and personal
Yeah.
life got so much closer in some ways. And then actually, I think it then encouraged people to share more than they might have sitting in a conference room. So
True.
that's how I gained a lot of insights during that, early month coming in. I had no agenda other than saying, help me understand, what this company is about. And I think it's the stories that sort of shape the transformation program that we eventually pushed at Bayer.
Yeah. It is fascinating because you almost turned what's a true disadvantage into an advantage, right? And actually got more out of it than you might have had you been there in person. Absolutely fascinating, Sarita.
I do think that that's probably, I know the continued discussion about future work and hybrid working.
Yes.
The best conversations are always the ones when an employee's child comes into the screen and you kind of ask,
Yeah.
how are you doing? Hi, right? And you start to have a conversation about their family or their pets come and then you start asking about, the family life and you learn so much about the person as a person. And I think that's something that we all appreciate it, right? And then sort of bring that sort of human relationship so much closer.
So true. I mean, we had a window into our colleagues' lives like never before.
That's exactly.
And, I think it helped us in so many ways to understand where they were coming from, what they were going through, and how we might be of help and support to them through this journey. Because many of us experienced, loss during the pandemic. There are so many other macro factors that are, really causing headwinds for people like war and recession and inflation and all of those things, but certainly also the rising global unhappiness, the rising global loneliness. All of those factors also definitely have an impact, social unrest at large.
That's
All of
right.
those have impact on our lives. It definitely helped us, I think, empathize more. Very well said. We have a lot in common, right? And one of those things is clearly the fact that our careers have been a blur of companies, countries, continents. And so, talk a little bit about that journey. I know that you sometimes struggle with the question, as I do, where are you from? Because it conjures up a whole lot of things. So, talk a little bit about why that's not such a great question. It's a better question than where are you really from? Not a
That's for
great
sure, right?
question. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not a great question. And so talk about why and
Yeah.
talk about maybe what's a better question to ask.
I remember when I was younger, when people asked me where I was from, I would generally say, yeah, I was from Hawaii because I wanted to be accepted as part of the big country, right? I didn't need to let people know that I was from Taiwan, not because I was not proud of it, but I just didn't see the need. But you know
Yeah.
what's really interesting is as I grow older, having moved around to different places and now in Germany, I found myself that I cherish my root a lot more. So
Mm.
nowadays, when people ask me where I'm from, I will say I'm from Taiwan, even though I'm a U.S. citizen and I lived in the U.S. for 30 years, right? So I think the geography, the location piece, at least for me personally, is always a bit of reflection of how much do I trust this person and do I really understand why are they asking this question, right?
Right, right.
Because what I also get a lot, Shauna, is I also have people asking, so where are you from? And you realize they're actually just wanting to confirm their assumptions. Because
Yes.
I will tell
Or
them,
biases.
exactly. I'll say, oh, I'm from Taiwan. They will say, oh, but I thought you're from Singapore. I was just there a couple of years ago, and I just loved, the Singapore food. I'm like, okay, that's kind of interesting. You realize that some people are not really asking to really get to know you, right? They're asking to confirm their assumptions or their biases, and that was not necessarily the conversation that you find most productive. If the intention is to say, I really want to get to know you. So where you're from, it really doesn't quite capture the essence of who you are, right? Because it's a location question rather than a who you are question.
Right.
I think a better question really is tell me your story. Tell me
Yeah.
your story, Shauna. Tell me your story, and however you want to share what's important for you, however you want to share, that you want me to know. And I think that to me is a much better conversation starter. And that shows to me a sort of genuine interest to say, I want to get to know you, not just the location, right? Because that I think says so little about who you are.
Yeah. Beautifully said, Serena. That question that you said, tell me your story, is curious, it's caring, and it's judgment free. I
Yeah,
mean, it's definitely a way better question than where are you from?
yeah,
Also, I think what we don't realize is that it has become harder and harder to actually put a neat outline around our identity
absolutely.
because we are so many things all at once and we belong to so many places all at once. I have friends who, the couple may have two different nationalities and their kids may have three other nationalities that are different from them. Your story, my story, I mean, we are like a blend of our story traverses
That's
countries or
right.
continents in a different way. And so it's hard to sort of put a neat outline around, and box us into one particular identity. So
I
beautifully
completely
said.
agree. Completely agree.
You've been among the first, the few, the only in way too many spaces that may or may not have been ready for you. So, what has that journey been like for you? And is there perhaps an instance or a story that you can think of where you may have had to overcome the challenge of it?
When I first started at Cargill, to be clear, I had a great time at Cargill. It's a very caring company, it has a sort of Midwest ethos to it. But when I first started at Cargill, I sat down for an onboarding lunch with one of the senior executives at the time, who has since retired and retired many, many years ago. It was a lunch where, of all his great intentions, was trying to give me some guidance and coaching in terms of how to be successful. But at the end of lunch, I basically summarized it. I said, so basically, what you're telling me is I am not just a minority, but I'm a quintuple minority because I am a female, I'm Asian, I'm not from the Midwest. Right? Most of the people there, I think they're from the Midwest.
Right.
I don't have a farming or an agricultural background. And oh, by the way, I was at the time about a dozen years younger than my peers at the corporate vice president level. So I said, that's basically what you're telling me, right? And he kind of thought about it. He said, yeah, that's about it. That sort of summarizes it. So I was like, thanks for the support. I really appreciate this. Right? But but what was really interesting, I've learned over the years that when you're the minority, you create a curiosity in others. Just oftentimes, and I always try to remember that people come at this with good intentions. Oftentimes, because everybody are driven by their own past experiences, just like we are. I always try to assume good intentions, and sometimes it's actually up to me or up to us as a minority to say, let me bridge this gap. Let me help you understand. We might not be as different as you think we are, right?
Right.
In fact, there are lots of commonalities and similarities. Whether it's especially for example, in my times working in the Midwest, a lot of similarity in terms of family values, in terms of work ethics, in terms of respect for the society and respect for the people around you. And I think there's a lot of those commonalities that and I try to bring out and say, look, we're actually not as different as you think, despite that I might look different from you, or I might have a different experience from you. So I always sort of take it upon myself to, trying to bridge that gap. That's how I see it, because I also have this belief that I think, the more self-conscious you become as a minority, the more like a minority you're going to show up. So instead of looking for those differences, I look for commonalities. And by the way, I'll give you a second example. I was also the labor director for Germany when I took on the role at Bayer. And being a labor director means I have, first-hand interactions and also responsibility to cultivate relationship with the Works Council. For them, obviously, the working language is German. And I'll tell you, German is probably one of the hardest languages that I have experienced. And my German is really, really not great. So unfortunately, I had to rely on translation whenever I interact with them. And this is the first for the Works Council here at Bayer to have to work with a non-German speaking labor director. And so it is uncomfortable. And I think the key at the end of the day is for me to recognize that this is new for them. And it's actually upon me to potentially put them at ease and to say, I always start by joking a little bit and say, hey, look, my German is improving, but unfortunately, it's still not at the level where we can have a fluent conversation. And bridging that gap to me, I think is really, really important. And how, for us to navigate away from focusing on the differences and being the minority, but really find a common ground.
Yeah. There's so many learnings in what you said, Serena. The first is the fact that, when you face a situation, you can either choose to be offended,
Yeah.
right? Or you can choose to assume positive intent and see the person with empathy and grace and make the effort to help them, right, overcome what they're going through. And the second part of what you said is assuming positive intent has benefits, certainly for the person that you're trying to help, but also for yourself, because you're showing up as a confident leader, who is, in a place to help another person overcome what they are facing in terms of biases, etc. So that's really beautifully said.
We judge ourselves by our intent, and we judge others by their actions.
True.
The question is always, how do you eventually build enough of that trust in the relationship to say, let me really understand the intention behind it. Let me bridge the gap.
We often tend to focus and obsess about our differences rather than the similarities, which we have many more of than we have differences.
Yeah, that's right.
This podcast is brought to you by Just Human, We offer a broad range of leadership development solutions, including mindful leadership workshops and executive coaching. To learn more, visit us at justhuman.io. And now, back to the podcast.
Well, I'll give you another. I'm sure you experienced it as well, Shauna. I think, my parents are from different parts of Taiwan, okay? Mm-hmm. And they all speak different dialects at home. So it was quite interesting because when they first started dating and when they was planning to get married, there's quite a bit of worry among both sides, okay? Because the families speak different dialects, and they're from two different parts of the island, different cultures. Are they really going to get along, right? And the good news were, my grandparents at the time were all quite open-minded, right, to allow that marriage to take place. So if you ask them where they're from, my dad will say, I'm from, the city, and my mom will say, I'm from that city. And then if you pull out, right, and you pull out, when we moved to the US, and as we talked about where you're from, and then you will realize, when you see someone from Taiwan, you feel the sense of kinship. You never ask about, gee, are you from city A or city B? You say, no, we're all from Taiwan, right? And then you pull out again and you say, gosh, now I'm in Germany. Guess what? It's no longer which state you're from. If you see somebody from the US, you feel the sense of kinship, right? So you realize that, this idea of forming kinship is sort of human nature. But at the same time, if you think about the conflicts that people have at work, or even, gosh, if you talk about politics, people seem to focus on the smallest differences and forgetting that the kinship actually exists at the highest level, right? Yeah. So at the end of the day, gosh, one day if someone asked us again, where are you from? People are going to say, I'm from Earth. Right. I mean, just imagine that, and the kinship that creates among all human beings. Okay. So, I think this is kind of, at the end of the day, that's what we all need to keep in mind. So the humanity exists at a universal level, and, we all can be better at it instead of focusing on the differences.
Very well said. On that philosophical note, let's head into more, a different question. We all have limiting beliefs, things like, whether it's imposter syndrome, self-doubt, insecurities that hold us back, that seem to have these crazy hold on us. Have you ever had a limiting belief, and what did you do to overcome it?
The answer is all of above. How's that, Anna? So I'll tell you my very first project experience at McKinsey. Now, this is obviously many, many years ago. But I was a first-year associate. I was working on a project in the financial district, actually unfortunately, the World Trade Center. I was working on a very, very tough project where the clients were highly emotional about the outcome of the project, and they have big stake. And the project was running, it was one of those where every Friday night, being the lowest, most junior person on the totem pole, I will stay overnight and I will hand correct the pages, and I'll fax them over for people to do the PowerPoint, and I will stay overnight to make sure the pages come back, and I'll proofread them. And every Friday I will go to bed at 6, 7 in the morning, and I'll let my managers present. Okay. It was like that for many weeks until the first progress review. I was invited, I showed up, and I didn't say a word. I didn't say a word in the progress review. So at the end of the meeting, when we were wrapping up on the way out, my manager pulled me aside and said, Serena, how come you didn't say anything? I say, I don't know what's there to say. And you're the manager, you know all the work I've done. And the manager basically gave me probably the most important advice that I continue to hold on to today. He basically said, you got to realize the rule of the game has changed. Just doing good work is not enough. Right? If you don't have, a voice at the table, you will never have a voice at the table. And that was probably the biggest wake-up call. And that also triggered a lot of self-reflection and asking the question, why? Why I didn't speak up. Was I afraid? Yes. What was I afraid about? Because I was afraid I'm going to say something stupid, right? Because everybody else looked so smart around me and I didn't quite feel I belong. And I think the second layer I think as I reflected on that was also actually it's a bit of a cultural upbringing. I grew up in, still a fairly traditional Chinese society where, the respect for elders is absolutely prevalent. I mean, that's how we still live at home with my parents, right? My dad is the absolute authority. So you learn, and part of that respect is, you don't really jump in unless you really have fully thought through what you want to say. You don't really argue. You don't create arguments, right? Harmony is key, and sharing your opinions only if you really been asked to do so. So I think it was in multiple things. It was insecurity about what I can say, insecurity about whether I belong at McKinsey, and this a bit of the limiting belief of how I should behave, right? As in call it an Asian woman, based on my upbringing. So I think it was multiple things that came to play. To move past it, a lot of it is that self-reflection. It's really asking myself what's holding me back. And by the way, even at the time, I also was not very confident with my English. I always felt that I have an accent and I wasn't sure if people will understand me, right? So it's all these factors, and how do you actually, sort of parse through it and start building the confidence that says, hey, look, I belong, I'm here, and, I'm still here, and I will be successful. What I say is valuable. And by the way, the Western world is probably slightly differently operated compared to an Asian world, and I need to learn to have my voice and being heard. So I think it's working through those, so almost a step at a time, and continue to get feedback from the managers and mentors I work with, right? And I always ask them, at the end of the meeting, how did I do? What can I do better? And I think that's what sort of helped me find my own style in terms of how do I contribute, right? That still meet my and fit with my own values, and that's really important, right? So I'm not changing who I am, but I'm refining how I continue to deliver so that I can have impact.
And that is key, right? Because you're sort of not changing who you essentially are, but you are sort of adapting to what's needed to be effective in an environment that's different.
Correct. And I think that's really important. And I think that's a fine line, because I think lots of people say just be who you are. And I think, yes, you want to be who you are, but we are also imperfect human beings. I want to be who I am, but that the definition of me continue to improve over time.
Exactly. One of the things you said at the beginning was about striving for better, right?
Mm.
And it's almost like you had an inkling of your purpose or something that's fueled your life since the very beginning. So, could you talk a little bit about how you've gone about defining your purpose, but also how that has fueled your career and life choices over time?
I think it's a great question. Maybe that's more of a life values that I believe in.
And even your choices of whether it is, P&L leadership for a business or whether it is your love for transformation, certainly that reflects the striving for better piece as well.
Yeah, I think for sure. I think especially the transformation work, right? I did the transformation work in both two of my previous companies, and I think what at least give me the energy is always when you talk to people and say, how do you make your work better? How do you make your professional life more meaningful? And you see people's eyes lit up. They say, oh
Yes.
my gosh, if we can just make the company more agile, if we can make it more flexible, if we can go after this innovative opportunity, if we can serve customer differently. So you see that the passion that people bring to the table, if you can help them, right, with sort of, and call it striving for better organization. And so I think, and that's what gives me energy as well. So I think indeed, right, transformation at the end of the day sounds like a big word, but that's what it ought to be. It is, making it's helping every individual in a company that says, I see the inspiration of where this could go, and I'm excited about that future, and I want to transform myself and transform the company for that. So I think indeed that drives me because it drives people.
I love that you say that because, having done many transformations in my career as well, that's my favorite part as well, because it's the realization that the answers lie within the organization often, right? All too often, the answers are within the organization. And almost how can you be a vehicle to unlock some of those insights and bring them up to the surface in a way that transformation can occur for the better. And so beautifully said, Serena. Couldn't agree more. You talked about your purpose, you talked about your values, which is about striving for better. And you talked about how it's fueled your career. I'd love to know why it is so important for you. It seems more like a calling. And so, why is it so important for you to make things better?
That's a great question. I'm not sure I know, Shahana. I'll tell you one story. I think I was in fourth grade. Okay. I came home from the, I think it's a semester final exam. I came home and my dad asked me, how did I do? I said, I kind of shrugged my shoulder and said, oh, I did okay. I think I came in, number two, okay, in a class of 50 kids. In my typical dad fashion, he didn't congratulate me, right? He basically said, why are you not number one? It's a very typical Asian parents, no? Maybe in a moment of defiance, which I never done, I talked back to him. I said, Dad, if everybody wants to be number one, then who's going to be number two? And he slapped me at that moment. That was a one and only time that I ever remember my dad actually hit me. And I was so upset. I'm like, what's wrong with what I said? And then that night he came and talked to me. He said, what you said is not wrong, but it's the way you said it that it seems like you gave up on your own potential to be the best you can be. I know you can be number one. And if you don't think that way, then you are wasting what you can be.
Yeah.
So it was a hard learning for me, but I obviously, still remember that. It's a bit of the double-edged sword, right? You have parents who have such high expectations and believe in what you do, and they continue to push you, that make you feel that you can be better and you can use that force for good. In some ways, I was lucky that I have, parents that are both pushing and supportive at the same time.
We all face, I think, gut-wrenching dilemmas at work, right? Especially when something's not quite aligned to our purpose. You have this gut-wrenching dilemma of, do you do the easy thing and the quick thing, right? Or do you do the harder thing, but which is aligned to your purpose? Have you ever faced, this kind of a dilemma at work? And how did you make the choice?
Take the last transformation program that I ran, at Bayer. It definitely was not without challenges. Right? I think, starting from how do you work with, all stakeholders to say, we need a change. What does change actually mean? This is an organization that had gone through many changes in the past. How do you make sure that this is not just an HR program, but the leaders really own it? How do you get a buy-in from Works Council? And eventually, how do you then go out to the employees to say, trust us, come along, because we believe this is going to make your life better. And some of those decisions, I had to make those jointly with my peers at the board of management level. But there are definitely some decisions where, you kind of have to say, look, we might not all agree, but this is the right thing to do. We got to go and do it.
You're so right, because in transformations, the path of least resistance is rarely the right path. Because, unless you're truly going to change something drastically, right? It's not a transformation. Then it is just incremental.
I got a private note on LinkedIn from someone who said, as a new transformation leader, you can't just challenge status quo because, the existing executives don't like it, right?
That's the point.
That's exactly what I wrote back. I said, well, that's exactly the point. Transformation inherently is an oxymoron if you don't drive change. So there you go.
Well, so you had posted on LinkedIn about inspirational leadership recently, and that went viral, right? There's so many people who commented on it. But also, especially as you were leaving Bayer, right, people reflected on your leadership, and there are, a few themes that kept coming up. So one was about your authenticity. It was about, putting your team first, right? And it was about the trust, right? You having their back and things like that. And so the comments sort of all, really alluded to some of that. So talk a little bit about how you went about defining who you wanted to be as a leader.
Yeah.
And maybe, an experience or a story that, helped you shape who you finally have become as a leader.
Well, I'll tell you my very first project management experience at McKinsey. Right? So I was, after about 2 years of being associate, I was, asked to lead a project. It's a fairly sizable project. And by the way, I was planning my wedding at the same time, right? So it was first time project manager with a sizable team and planning a wedding for 300 people. I mean, the first couple of weeks of that project was absolutely tough because the truth is I didn't quite know what I was doing, right? Meaning, it was so easy to jump into and revert back to what I used to know, which is, hey, let's check your spreadsheet. How are you doing on that? Let's check your numbers. Are they correct? Hey, tell me what analysis are you going to do? Let's sit down and look at it. So I was micromanaging, right? And mind you that this is at McKinsey. I mean, we're talking about a group of highly motivated, all type A people, right? So a couple weeks in, this group basically collectively came to me and said, Serena, what you're doing is not working. You don't need to babysit us. We know what we're doing. Can you find out what you're supposed to do as a project manager?
Oh, wow.
It really was. And the good news is, these were all colleagues and friends, right? So they could come and they know that they could come to me and tell me exactly that. And I was like, oh my gosh, right? So what exactly am I supposed to do as a project manager? Because I realized, all the skill sets that got me here is not going to get me where I need to be. And really, the truth is, the folks that I was leading, they have probably better technical skills than I do. I really don't need to sit there and try to check the Excel spreadsheets, right? And so I think that's probably the first wake up call. So in that setting, I basically learned that, what the colleagues needed from me, actually a lot of it is encouragement, right? Is to say, you're doing a great job, keep going. It is also setting the pace, right? It's pulling the team together so you kind of have the overall plan so people know how they all fit in with each other. And of course, you're there to catch them, right? So if things don't go well, you're there to say, hey, let's sit down and let's figure out how do we do this. And it's for me to manage the part that they don't need to manage, which is a lot of it, managing a client, managing the senior partners, quote unquote, a stakeholder management, right? So you do the things that they shouldn't have to do. So at the end of the day, I think I realized, being a manager or being a leader, right? Really, you're not managing things, right? You're leading people. So it is about, how you inspire them so that they feel that, hey, yeah, this is the work they really love to do. It is about creating an environment that people are happy, people want to come to work, and that you want to come to work yourself, right? And it's about having their back. Trust me, I made enough of my mistakes because my default, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, right? My default is, let's go in and let's figure out, what's wrong. And I will go very detailed, and I always have to check myself and say, no, that's not what the team needs from me.
That's such a great story and learning, Serena. Most of us fall into leadership, right? We rarely have, like you said, the time or the space to sit and reflect on who we want to be as a leader, what's the impact we want to have on our teams, how do we want to lead the team to achieve better results, all of that stuff. And what you said is such a great example because it's often these crucible moments, right, that sort of help us pivot and, like is a wake up call, like you said, to do things differently. Is there perhaps another story of, how your leadership style refined or you grew over time as a leader because of the experience?
These are kind of stories that unfortunately, sometimes these things you experience not once, but twice or three times until you kind of really learn it, right? Well, I'll tell you another one. Unfortunately, it's also not a very glamorous story. When I took on the role as president of Cargill's animal feed business, that was my very first P&L experience. And I walked in to the leadership team meeting of, about 20 or so members. And I looked around the room and realized these are all, senior VPs who've been in that business for 20 plus years. Okay. So the truth is they all know the business much better than I do. Right. And I'll tell you, even after all those years, if that was my first P&L experience. So very quickly, a couple of things set in. One is imposter syndrome, right? Wow, can I really lead this group? What do I know? And two is the sense of insecurity. I don't know enough about this business. So would they look up to me? Why would they follow me? My default is, let me get in deep. Let me, try to, learn a few things so that I can impress upon them that I know more than they do. And I think the first couple weeks was that. I tried to learn, and I tried to sort of, in meetings, I try to speak up so that I can tell them, what I've seen elsewhere, what I've seen in other industries, my previous consulting career, what have I done, what are the best practices. And then a few weeks in, similar things sort of happen, right? A couple of them kind of say, hey, they didn't know me that well, but they kind of say, Serena, maybe, there's a different way of approaching this. We know that you want to learn about the industry. Why don't we show you around a little bit so that you kind of take a bit of time to breathe? And by the way, you know what? Our business plan was pretty solid. You shouldn't have to worry about it. Why don't you just let us run? And I think that's probably when I, hit me again, right? I mean, this was almost a repeat that says, okay, I think once again, I'm, going back to my default again, right? There's the sense of insecurity as a leader, and wanting to dig in and micromanage because I didn't quite, understand my role. And that's when I learned to back off. And I think the other really important learning is learn to say, I don't know. And I probably still don't say that enough, but there's so much power, right, in that, just to tell your team, team, I don't know the answer to this. Can you teach me? Or I didn't understand this. Can you help me? Every time when I said it, the team always rallied around it, and so to help with it. So unfortunately, I think I probably still learn too slowly, and I still make that same mistake from time to time. But I at the end of the day, I think that's probably something I continue to remind myself, right? Just, you got to trust your team. You got to trust your team, and you got to know that your role there is not to micromanage. It is, at the end of the day, it is, trusting them and creating an environment for them to be successful.
There are so many powerful lessons in what you just said, Serena. Self-awareness for a leader is so critical because there are a lot of leaders who may not recognize what triggers their insecurities, what triggers their, self-doubt,
Yeah.
and how do they behave when they are triggered. The fact that you already know that, I think, puts you, significantly ahead of the game in so many ways. The second part of it, I think, is the fact that, the team, even despite not knowing you, felt comfortable enough to kindly suggest alternative, ways. I think that again is so powerful. The team taking a chance on you, right?
Yes.
That's kind of what it communicates. And I
Yes.
think the third piece really is making a mistake is not an issue, right? It's about recovering from that mistake. I think one of the big things that differentiate the great leaders from the not is the fact that you can identify or discern a learning moment
Yeah, I
and
think
make
that's right.
use of it, right?
I
Which you have done perfectly in both of these instances. But it's also so interesting that that there is, the default, right? The default mechanism, and our mind tricks us, right?
Yes.
Because our default mechanism is the exact opposite of what's needed in the situation.
Well
Such a
summarized.
powerful learning moment. And, thank you so much for sharing that. In organization transformations, just like in HR, I think, right? We see the best in leaders, we see the visionary, the inspiring, the empowering, the empathetic. And we also see the worst in leaders, right? The narcissistic, the insecure, etc., etc. And I think, sometimes it comes to us to really have to help and coach a leader and help them grow. So, could you think of perhaps a story or an example where you've had to work, and you've worked with so many leaders over your career, where you've had to help someone grow, and what was the outcome?
In one particular situation where, and this happens within an HR organization, where we were launching a fairly large program in terms of how HR itself need to transform to be able to help the rest of the organization. And in one of those meetings, I noticed that, one of my leaders, it was the body language, right? It's not what he said. In fact, he didn't say anything. It was a body language, sitting back with arms crossed, and you can just tell that, he's not only not fully bought into this, he's probably already thinking, how is he going to get out of this particular situation, right? And then you see all the sort of the defense mechanisms start to play. And I think the worst part of all that is, I believe in sort of the unity and the power of the team, right? And as soon as someone exhibit a bit of that passive aggressiveness, and in fact, in that case, it was purely passive, you know that this is actually going to, it's not going to unite a team. And this is actually where I knew that I have to take action fairly quickly. I mean, in that instance, is basically what I did is I pulled him aside right after the meeting and actually kind of sat down and just to say, hey, what's on your mind? Again, I think to me, what I learned over the years is that you cannot approach this with a judgment. The leaders approach transformation differently. Oftentimes, my experience is out of insecurity of their own job, insecurity of the future, insecurity of not knowing exactly what skill sets is going to be needed for them to lead in that new world. And so the way to approach insecurity is to offer them a bit of assurance, and offering them the support. So for me, what I did is I basically sat down and just asked, hey, what's going on? How did you find that conversation? I noticed that you kind of lean back a bit. What did you agree and what did you not agree? What worries you the most? So it was talking through some of those. And by the way, and then also through those, you learn about their personal concerns. Like insecurity oftentimes is not professional insecurity, it's personal insecurity. So you learn about the personal concerns and you have a much better sense of what's on the person's mind. And that actually carried on for a few sessions to work through both the personal consideration as well as how I believe, this leader could eventually still be part of the team and be able to lead it. And this sort of happened in a few different situations with different leaders as well. And I think that has always been a bit of my go-to toolkit, which is the best way to face resistance is not to come with hard-hitting messages, but really to understand where they're coming from, understand their insecurity, and try to bring them along.
That is such a great story, Serena, and beautifully said. I think the lesson is so powerful of not approaching with force, or with judgment, but approaching with curiosity, trying to understand. And the fact is, change is hard. Change is hard for everybody. And people's insecurities, people's worries are all different. And so providing them support through that change is so key as a leader. So many more questions. We've tried to capture some of those in a rapid fire section. Are you ready?
Okay, I am ready.
First question. If your life was made into a movie, what would be the title and what would be the theme song?
Wow. Okay, the title will be Always on the Move.
I love it.
And the theme song, I don't know, the first theme song that comes to mind is like one of those 007 movies. Like, it's adventures, it's unknown, it's thrilling, So that would be the dun 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 dun. Yeah, that would be the song that goes with it.
Oh wow, like a total blend of emotions. Awesome. Second one, what's a book that's changed your life?
Probably about 6-7 years ago, I read a series of books that sort of reaffirmed how I show up as a female leader. And I always treasure that. So it's, everything from this book called How Remarkable Women Lead to Lean In, which I know everybody have read, Multipliers, the Inspiration Code, the Confidence Code. And there's a great book called Leadership and Self-Deception.
If you had a superpower, what would it be and why?
I would love to be a trust creator.
Ah, love it.
How do you quickly help create and generate trust among people and among societies? Because I think trust is the ground, the starting point for having truthful dialogues and really building that common ground that we talked so much about.
Yeah. Oh, love it. Love it. What is one failure you're proud of?
You know, I failed to land a consulting job that I really want to get when I graduated from college. But I'm happy now, obviously, that I didn't get it. So I, had the P&G experience, and eventually I went into consulting after business school. But that was a good failure in the sense that I learned what I need to do to prepare for those interviews. I learned, what they're looking for at the time was probably not what I was best at in any case. And of course, it gave me the opportunity to experience something completely different.
What is one piece of advice that's helped you in your career, Serena? And what's one piece of advice you'd like to share with our listeners today?
Find your own voice. I think throughout my career, I have gotten so many encouragements from people to tell me to speak up. But I think that speaking up goes beyond just speaking up as in sharing your views, right? Speaking up, especially over the years, really to me becomes, how do I lend my voice to help others and to have an impact? So be comfortable, right, in your own skin. Continue to find out what defines what does it mean to be you. And that's what I mean by finding your voice. And that's probably one piece of advice that I would like to leave here.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much, Serena. It was such a pleasure having you on our podcast. And I know our listeners would love to benefit from your wisdom. So thank you so much.
You're so welcome. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for hosting, Shana.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. We'd love to hear from you. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the Mindful Leadership Podcast brought to you by Just Human. We are a growth accelerator for our clients, helping your people and businesses thrive through human-centered, ecosystem-based people solutions. To learn more, visit us at justhuman.io and schedule a 30-minute free call with us.